I'm pretty consistent with the fact that I have said that the 2024 playoff push starts the moment the Egg Bowl ended. So we're going to get into the transfer portal, roster building, and we are going to start preparing mentally for that journey. Anyway, this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and I am likely the only person that you're going to hear from today that has had an office in the Manning Center and has worked in the national media at Yahoo Sports. Thank you very much for joining us. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the opening of the transfer portal and how Ole Miss is going to go about roster building, likely if they're smart. Also, we'll tell you a little bit about the first portal visitor this season and what that means. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We're free and available on all podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make this show possible. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Transfer portal is getting ready to open up. I think December 4th is when it's officially opening up, and it's going to get hectic. If we all know how this looks, the first couple of weeks of a transfer portal cycle is crazy hectic. It just is. And you're going to have a situation where there's going to be some Ole Miss players going out. There's going to be players coming in. We all have seen the chaos over the last couple of years. And whenever Ole Miss is in position to build transfer portal wise, I think it's important to realize where Ole Miss sits at the moment. Now, barring Quinshon Judkins being offered a ton of money by another school, barring Jaxson Dart deciding to go pro, I mean, right now you can kind of assume that Jaxson Dart and Quinshon are probably going to be back for the 12-team playoff run. Jaxson, honestly, is more important than Quinshon in that situation. Just because of what that means at the quarterback position. At running back, you have players like Ulysses Bentley. You have Trey Harris, who, like I said, I have about as good a source as you can have that says right now Trey Harris is 50-50 on what he's going to do. You have Jordan Watkins who can come back. Dayton White, the whole wide receiver unit can come back. And this is a group of three players that had over 700 yards receiving each this regular season, and that's even with Trey Harris being out for 3 games. So there's different things that can happen. Caden Priestcorn can come back. JJ Pegues can come back. So that is going to affect things. They need to get answers, probably Ole Miss does, fairly early in this process so they know how to attack this. But right now, the free space that Ole Miss is going to do this year is they're going to do what they can to get better up front. And there's going to be some places that you have to make a change, like Quincy McGee and Victor Kern. I think they were completely true one and dones. So you're going to need to replace them. So we will see exactly how Ole Miss does that. And the first visitor we're going to talk about in the third segment today kind of addresses that. But I think the line of scrimmage is going to be the most dominant areas. You might see some linebackers getting done, but they have TJ Dudley, who's going to be on the team next year and ready to go. They have Centarian Perkins. They have Chris Graves. They've had Jaden Kennedy. They recruited last year for next year, if that sounds weird. But that's 4 players. So this defensive rebuild isn't going to be as big, but the line of scrimmage needs to happen. And the proof that line of scrimmage needs to happen is what happened in the Georgia game. Ole Miss has to get better on the line of scrimmage. Players like, JJ Pegues, really, really good football player, can be a dominant football player, but he needs some help. Ole Miss, whenever they go small on the defensive line, has problematically matched up against teams that have decided, hey, let's just run the ball. And you saw that a little bit when they moved Jared Ivey into 3-tech and gotten a little bit smaller and a little bit quicker on the outside. at the end of the year, they weren't really the same animal that they were in the beginning of the year, whether energy is wear down, however it goes. I mean, that's just the case. So I do think Ole Miss is going to spend the early part of the transfer portal on the interior offensive and the interior defensive line. They're going to try and get a little bit better. And I think Ole Miss's strategy is not going to be second-team players at Georgia. You don't beat Georgia with second-team players from Georgia. I think Ole Miss in the transfer portal is going to try and find players from lower levels that were hidden gems. These are those players that 10 years ago ended up going in the second round in the NFL draft from Central Arkansas. You need to find those type guys and get them into your program. And I think that's what Ole Miss is going to try and do. They're going to try and find guys that have outperformed their level to be ready to go, as opposed to finding somebody that is less than the starters of the Georgia Bulldogs and the Alabama Crimson Tide that you're trying to catch, if that makes sense at all. Now, those type players make a ton of sense for some programs, okay? I'm not saying they don't. And I'm not necessarily saying there's a problem with them. If you get a backup at Alabama, that's not a problem. I think, though, Ole Miss has just decided to find the older players, the like Isaac Ukwus, the John Saunders, those guys, as opposed to the Monty Montgomerys. I think that as this transfer portal system grows, Ole Miss is developing hey, we need to look at that. We need to get that. This is important. They're getting a checklist on transfers to make it more of a surefire thing. And they're hitting on quite a bit. They're hitting on a good many of them. And we'll see exactly how that goes. But next year, Jaden Kennedy is going to take over. He had a year recovery from an injury. He played a little bit, but the injury he had was a little bit difficult. So we'll see if he gets better moving in. He's a slot corner that was an all-conference USA type player at Tulane before he transferred, before the injury. And you're going to have TJ Dudley, who did not get his waiver this year, but he's going to be good to go for next season. And that's going to solve a good bit of your linebacker issues. That is somebody with 3 or 4 years of eligibility that's ready to come in and thump. Him playing beside some Taron Perkins, thump. And Perkins getting in the weight room and getting a little bit bigger, that's going to be big. And I think you're going to have a situation where those two are the primary middle linebackers on Ole Miss's defense. I think that is the goal. Then you have Chris Graves, who has a chance to be the dude, honestly. He actually started after getting to Ole Miss late. He got his waiver and everything. He actually started against Georgia. So I think you're going to see Chris Graves. He's going to feature more and more the former top 100 player. You're going to see him featured defensively. So these things are going to affect what you're doing in the transfer portal. Now, one of the benefits that Ole Miss has is they're not big game hunting in this transfer portal. I don't think Ole Miss is looking at a left tackle. I don't think Ole Miss is looking at a quarterback. At least they better not be looking at a quarterback. I don't think they're looking at a wide receiver. I don't think they're looking at a running back. I think Ole Miss literally on the defensive line, I don't necessarily know that they're looking at a rush end, but maybe if you're looking at something somewhat high dollar, they're going to find a rush end in the portal. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the direction. But when you look at Ole Miss's defense, linebackers, they're looking for depth there. Defensive backs, they're looking for depth there. But that's the main thing you're looking for is people that can come in and play. You're trying to find the next John Saunders. You're not trying to find the next Jaxson Dart. You're trying to find the next Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste. You're not trying to find the next Quinshon Judkins. You're trying to find the next Isaac Ukwu. You're not trying to find the next Trey Harris. And that is going to help you in retention. And we're going to talk about that in just a second, because retention is also going to be important, because Ole Miss, while they have money and they're good in the collective, they still need to be efficient. And I think there needs to be some ground rules in there. And there's a tendency, it's like, oh, we need that. We got to keep that. And just calm down and don't freak out about that type stuff as well. I do want to let you know, Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. We're just getting started. We talk about some of the advantages Ole Miss might have in the portal this season and how they might attack it. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you versus the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch the winnings roll in. And with basketball season here, now you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. That's pretty cool. A league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at 10.5 as a combo of 3-point field goals made and receptions. That is really neat. Prize Picks also offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players get injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player that exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit matchup to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for a first deposit matchup up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. That's unbelievably cool, by the way. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. Now, we talked about some of the advantages that Ole Miss has in the transfer portal this year and the fact that Ole Miss doesn't need a quarterback, a wide receiver, or running back or necessarily a cornerback, although you might grab one of them. You might try and find a corner, and you might have the money to do that. You don't need a left tackle. And I think you're looking for an Isaac Ukwu type player in the portal. And that lets you know that they don't have the needs that some teams have. When everybody is fighting and going crazy over, a quarterback that's in the portal, Will Howard from Kansas State, everybody's fighting over that. Auburn and Arkansas and Mississippi State, they're all fighting over this player. Ole Miss kind of gets to sit back and cherry pick, and they can overspend a little bit if they need to on a rush end. They can overspend on an interior offensive lineman. They can get the creme de la creme on the line of scrimmage because they don't have to fight these games. They don't have to play those games. And it is important that Ole Miss is efficient in this process. It is great that Ole Miss's NIL is healthy, but part of that is efficiency. I had Walker Jones on the show, and he talked about how Ole Miss needs to make $1 spend like 3. That means they have to be efficient. That means that they have to make some hard decisions from time to time, and they just don't have the ability to just throw money in every direction. Now, this is a hypothetical situation. Don't go over, but I think that Ole Miss fans need to be potentially ready for something like this because it's eventually going to happen. Quinshon Judkins is one of the best running backs in the country, if not the best running back in the country. He's a great running back. He is the highest paid NIL player on the team that everybody said over and over. If you listen to any Ole Miss podcast, you've heard that. Good player. He makes Ole Miss better. The Ole Miss running game is special because of him. Against Mississippi State, he looked like Earl Campbell. But that said, there has to be a line for Ole Miss that they just won't go over. They won't. If you look at the NFL, they don't overpay for running backs. And like I said, this is all hypothetical and I've heard nothing. Okay. So don't anybody freak out. I just wanted to illustrate this point. They need to be efficient with their money. And by doing that would be having a sense to, hey, this is the highest we will be willing to go for this player. Not just because some player is tugging at heartstrings of people and we have to keep this player at all costs, if that makes sense. We're honestly in a world, if, and this is, players wanted NIL and they deserved NIL. They wanted transfer portal. They deserve transfer portal. But the trade-off on that is college football has become a transactional industry. Nobody is a must-have. Everybody is expendable. Because at the same time, it's just like coaches. And coaches have been doing this for 20 years. Your school is always at the mercy of a coach and an agent to where they're going to try and milk money out of you. They're going to try and use you for a raise, or they're going to use another job to get that raise, and they're going to work in their own best interest, and that's fine. That's their best interest. It's not your best interest, but that's their best interest. Both are fine. Players are going to start playing that game as well. They just are. There's not really a lot you can do about that. So you have to make sure that you're in the best place in retention and understand in retention that, hey, I'm not going to go over this number. I'm not going to break the bank for an interior offensive lineman. I'm not going to break the bank for a punter. And if you stay true to that, if you stay real to that, while it might cost you a player every very rare now and then, it's going to make the team overall better because you're going to have a more well-balanced team to where, and much like the NFL, okay? Everybody talks about the NFL. Whenever a team has a quarterback that gets a big contract, think of, I don't know, that Drew Brees contract or Tom Brady making a ton of money. It hurts the rest of the roster. It actually makes the team worse, even though the quarterback needs that money just to stay. It's an interesting situation. But in the NIL world, that's kind of the world we're living in at the moment. But Ole Miss is in position this year. If everything goes to chalk and like we think it's going to go, this transfer portal is just about depth and improving the line of scrimmages and get ready for the 12-team college football playoff that Ole Miss is going to be right in the thick of the discussion for. If Ole Miss wins their bowl game, I do not care which bowl game they go to. If Ole Miss wins that bowl game, they're going to be 6th, 7th in the country next year with a returning quarterback, with Quinshawn coming back, with that defense holding 5 out of 12 teams to under 300 yards. And Mississippi State was the 6th, and they gained 304. So half of the games this year was about 300 yards given up defensively. That's absolutely nuts when you look at what is happening on the defensive side of the ball. I told everybody before the season, this defense is going to be clunky because the players, there's some of the players recruited for that. Ashanti Seastrunk was recruited to be a 3-4 linebacker in Mike McIntyre system. He was recruited to that system, and he was a good soldier and did absolutely everything he needed to do. And by the end, he was a really good ball player and a huge contributor on this team. Large reason why Monty Montgomery was probably not on the field. But as Pete Golden brings in his dudes, his players, this defense is going to be better and better and better. And once that happens, look out. Seriously, with the offense that's on the other side, add a slightly more talented defense, just a slightly more talented. Just say a top 40 defense. If you add that, Ole Miss doesn't lose many games. That's just the way that is. And going into a 2024 12-team playoff to where Ole Miss has a chance to potentially be in position to host a first-round game, because that's the goal, okay? That's the ultimate goal. It's not just make it in the playoff. Everybody wants to make it in there. I think you want to host because that will be the biggest game in Vaught Hemingway's history. And it will be absolutely electric. It's a game December 17th. I forget the date, whenever that happens, or somewhere in that time frame to where everybody gets to be fired up. Everybody gets to do it. It'll have an electricity about it that no one has seen in Oxford, Mississippi. It will be by far the best game in the history of the University of Mississippi, any sport. So the goal needs to be host a playoff game. And if Ole Miss wins their bowl game, they're going to come into the season, preseason ranked 6th or 7th or 8th, somewhere in that ballpark in the country. You need to treat this bowl game like a regular season game to win this bowl game. You need to put all out in to win this game, because the difference between winning and losing is starting off the season 6th, 7th, or 8th, or starting the season off 15th to 17th, which means you're going to go into the season with no margin for error. You need to ensure that you have the most possible margin for error. So it doesn't matter if you play Texas, if you play Iowa, anybody in between, win the football game. Simple as that. If you do that, take care of your business in the transfer portal, take care of your business in recruiting, and take care of your business essentially off the field for the next 3 months, you'll be in a position to do something at Ole Miss that has never been done. Never been done. And I understand that Ole Miss won national titles. Those national titles were handed out after the regular season. The bowl games didn't even matter. This playoff game, if it happens, would be the biggest game in Ole Miss history. So you should be fired up about what could happen. Ole Miss has put themselves in position to be in the discussion. And if they win the bowl game, they're putting themselves in position to be in the discussion for hosting a 12-team playoff game. Really, really interesting stuff. You know, still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Ole Miss is set to get its first official visit of the portal season. We'll tell you about that and what that means right after this. But right now, I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Now, whenever you hire the right person, it's no different than hiring a football coach. If you hire the right football coach, he might have you in the conversation for the playoff by year 3. If you hire the wrong one, in 3 years, you're going to be hiring a new one and doing that all over again. The difference is, in the real world, if you hire the right one, they can just have a positive and measurable impact on your team. The wrong one, you're going to be doing this again in 3 weeks. So if you want less work, you want something that makes it a little bit easier. And LinkedIn's not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which make it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, 86% of small businesses get qualified candidates within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and they might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process easier and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here today for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to be the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Be part of history. Now, pretty cool. The transfer portal is going to start heating up when it opens up December 4th, but we're already starting to get official visits. I think grad transfers can visit and stuff like that, and it's going to be really important. Ole Miss is set to host their first official, and that's Gerquan Scott from Southern Mississippi. He's visiting. I think Zach Berry and On3, Ole Miss Spirit, had that. At least that's where I saw it. And so if they weren't first, I apologize, but that's where I saw it first. And it's a good player. Interior offensive line, think Quincy McGee kind of. You're seeing a lot of interior offensive line, some maulers that are going into the portal. I think this is designed because Ole Miss is facing a lot of double A gap type stuff to where it's basically designed to stop the inside zone play. They do that especially a lot. And you see them go. So Ole Miss is looking for some guys that are some maulers. Gerquan Scott is kind of that way. He's kind of really good at pushing people. There's a couple of players that are interesting at Memphis. And there's a couple of players that you will see popping up in the near future. Now, like I said earlier, the one thing that Ole Miss probably needs to do, Ole Miss does not need to be the team that takes Alabama's backups. That they do not need to be the team that takes Georgia's backups. And everybody's like, well, there's 78 four-star players on Alabama's roster. Yes, but the point for Ole Miss and what Ole Miss has discovered is they want people that have played a lot of football, like Game played a lot of football, that is mature, that's kind of done it. And if you take a backup at Alabama and Georgia, they haven't done it. It's no different than taking a freshman or a sophomore and putting them out there. Yes, practice might be heightened at Alabama and Georgia, but there's a difference between practice and the game. So Ole Miss is going to spend a lot of time on players like Gerquan Scott. The rumors are like McCalum Pounders from Memphis. I think there's another interior offensive lineman from Memphis that Ole Miss is going to pay attention to. You're going to see Ole Miss on the offensive line do whatever they can to kind of bulk up and get ready to go, especially in the interior of that defense. I would not be shocked, honestly. I would not be shocked if Ole Miss went out and got another center as insurance. I know Bryson Sanders kind of took that early in the process. Maybe he takes a step or two in camp. But Victor Kern and Quincy McGee, they were absolute hits on the offensive line. You're going to have to potentially replace them. Jalen Williams, you're going to have to, is he going to be the left tackle next year? He was the starter as a freshman. He was not the starter this year. Victor Kern took his job. Who is going to start next year? Was it going to be Williams? Is it going to be otherwise as Ole Miss looks for it? I hope it's Williams because left tackles, as you can imagine, they're an expensive thing. Jeremy James at right guard's fine. I'm completely okay with that. I'm okay with Caleb Williams. Reese McIntyre, we'll see what happens with him. There was a situation where when depth happened, Reese McIntyre ended up having to be the center that goes in. We'll see exactly how he does. But the offensive and defensive line are probably going to be the two most important pieces in the transfer portal this year as Ole Miss goes to the 12-team 2024 college football playoff potentially. It deserves to be. The line of scrimmages probably need to be the area that Ole Miss needs to build up over the next couple of years because skill position wise, Ole Miss is there. Ole Miss has the skill position guys. And they seemingly do every year. They need to get better on the lines of scrimmage. Like I said, they have some good players. They need some great players. They need to find their version of Laramie Tunsil and Robert Kimdichie. That's what they need to find. And no surprisingly, those were top 30 players in the country. So we'll see exactly what happens. On defensively and the defensive line class right now, they're there. They're probably not going to be ready to go as true freshmen, but some of those guys are going to play. Everybody needs to get ready for that. Some of those guys are going to play. But offensive line, I'm curious to see exactly what will go there as well. Anyway, thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. Everydayers, the schedule may be a little weird this week. Pratt Rogers is a little bit later. Bill Flowers a little bit later. Tom Vanderford is a little bit later. He's moving to Saturday morning. Then we have Brian Smith and those guys. We have Josh Guest. We're going to keep doing our experts on the show. Where they're going to sit is going to be a little bit different because there's no football game happening that day. So just be patient with that and understand that. For your second listen, Locked On has launched a first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national news shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy.